I saw something on LinkedIn this morning about this woman who interviewed with like 85 companies and she finally got a job. And 85 is a ton. Like I immediately just thought of there has to be fundamentally something not happening in those interviews if you interviewed 85 times.
In this episode, we look at the top 5 most common interview questions, and we look at them both from a hiring manager's perspective and also for a job seeker. We look at why a hiring manager would want to ask this question and what they should look for, and we look at it from a applicant standpoint of what points they want to touch base if they want to impress someone that they're interviewing with. Hope you guys enjoyed this. This is a fun episode, and it's based on a couple of thousand interviews that Frank and I have done on both sides of the table. If you are new to our podcast, please hit subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you are a longtime listener and you have not given us that 5-star review on Apple Podcasts with some nice comments, please stop right now and take the time to do that. We'd appreciate it.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Matthews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God here.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie,
Ian, you son of a bee.
how's it going, buddy?
Oh man, we got to get serious. We're doing a serious topic today. No cursing.
Brass tacks, man. We are down to brass tacks. We are helping people find jobs that pay extraordinary amounts of money and get out of terrible jobs by interviewing better with the 7 most common interview questions out there. And actually, Frank, do you know how I chose these 7 interview questions?
Some kind of half-assed internet research.
Half-assed internet research is right. Actually, I used the data on this. These were the most watched answers on LinkedIn's Learning Center. They have a whole Learning Center in interviewing on different interview questions. And these 7 questions that we chose to talk about today are the most watched and most viewed. So these are questions that people are interested in that are, and actually in looking at the comment section, Frank, it's interesting to me just how much anxiety is around some of these questions, how the way some people react viscerally to some of these questions that we get into, the kind of nerves it gives them that I think a lot of that is largely misplaced, and it's more of it is just misunderstandings of what an interviewer is trying to do, and probably a little bit of inexperience.
For sure. When I read this list, I remember worrying about these questions as an interviewee, but now as someone who's literally interviewed, if you count screening people at job fairs, it's got to be into the multiple thousands, and physically sitting across the table and interviewing people, I'm well over 1,000 interviews. So these questions to me are just commonplace. They're things that I don't really react to or get a visceral reaction from. But I remember being a scared kid interviewing for an internship or my first job or a couple of promotions and thinking about these questions. And what I think the theme for me today, Ian, is this: preparedness in an interview is incredibly important. So you need to know who you are. You know what you're interviewing for. That's big. And you're really big on like researching the company. We'll get into that. I'm really big about coming into an interview prepared. And when I would interview and I got good at it, I had a list of accomplishments and I had a list of faults. And as I got older and I got more experience, I could really build on that list. But having good things to think about in front of an interviewee or an interviewer is critical.
Yeah, I think I think that's right. And I'm well north of 1,000 interviews myself, and I had many years as a senior executive where we had to hire 100 people. I had to make 100 offers to folks, which meant I was screening, reviewing, interviewing, 400 or 500 to interview 100, just screening resumes, looking at applications, things sent over my way. I didn't interview all of them, but I've given a lot of thought to why I ask certain questions. And when you talk about anxieties around things, a lot of these questions that we're going to cover today, to me, are kind of softballs, which I find interesting that someone would be so nervous about, because it's sometimes I just want to get to know you a little better, and I give you something open-ended. So I always find it interesting just what people choose to talk about. And our goal really as an interviewer, one of our first goals is to help you relax, because I understand the anxiety that comes, especially some of these jobs are changing people's lives. It's, especially if you got a job that's paying you $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 more. It's an executive role with equity. I understand the kind of life-changing moment this can be for somebody. And it is really hard to get to know someone, really know them, if they are really stressed out. And so I feel like an interviewer's first job in the first 5-10 minutes is to get that person comfortable, so I can see who they are and get them comfortable with me personally. So they're not thinking about don't screw up, which I think is human nature. When you come into an interview, I was, as a kid out of college, was just thinking, please just don't screw this up. 4 years of college, and I can't blow this. And the sooner I can get that person to not thinking about screwing up and just thinking about being themselves, the better an evaluation I can make.
The biggest mistake people make in an interview, the hiring manager, is they hire for likability. So if you're going to give yourself the best chance to be hired, be likable. The easiest way to be likable is to be relatable, to be communicated to well in a way that you kind of fit. And you have to think about this. The person interviewing you is going to be working with you. Do they like you? Do you give off the vibe of, this person will make my life better if I'm working with this person more and more? So those are the things that you really want to kind of strive for in an interview. And if you are nervous, what I always default to, especially as I get older, is really, really, really go to truth. If you're nervous, say you're nervous. Hey, I screwed that one up. Can I get that one back? I just thought of something different. These are things we can talk about as we go through this. But when I have had someone in front of me who has been honest, they've had a way better chance. So if you screw up the first question, it's not over. Like these are the things that what we really want to reinforce today is come in with a plan. But, Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan, then they get punched in the face. So if the first question punches you in the face, try and regroup, figure those things out, figure out how to be likable, figure out how to be yourself. Those are the things that if you convey it, you have a much better chance of winning the interview.
And I think you just said something that's important, where you talked about the biggest hiring manager. An interviewer's mistake is just hiring someone they like. So I think one thing, if you're listening to this and you're preparing for an interview or you're looking for a job transition, I think if I were researching something, I were giving you advice on what to research, I would look up unconscious bias and I would study it, because every interviewer has to fight it. And it doesn't mean that they're prejudiced. It just means that they have unconscious bias. The whole concept of unconscious is you don't know you're doing it. And so primacy bias, first impressions, they matter. How do you make a good one? That first 2 minutes, I would say 50% of people win the interview in the first 2 minutes if they're with an untrained interviewer. I would say recency bias, which is the last thing I remember. I remember first what I saw last, which is, do you close well? How did you do in the last 3 minutes, 5 minutes of the interview? Did you close strong? Just like me bias. That's the bias where you see somebody say, it reminds me of me when I was younger. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to make a great employee. It just means that you're biased to someone who's just like you. So there are 20, 25 biases that you can look up. And frankly, we should probably do an entire episode on this where we just talk about bias and interviewing. But I would look that up, because your job as someone who's interviewing is to take advantage of every opportunity you can. And if that means playing to a bias that an interviewer has and doesn't know about, well, so be it.
Our goal today is to get right into the meat. So I think this is a perfect time to transition to question one, Ian. This is a question that came up number one on the list. This is always my opener. I think this is Ian's opener. And it's some derivative of, tell me a little bit about yourself. And what I usually say to someone sitting across from me is, number one, hey, thanks for coming in. I offer them something to drink. I don't usually wear a jacket anymore. When I used to wear a jacket, I used to take it off and put it on the back of my chair and invite them to do the same. Those things in some formal cultures, that way to hope get you to relax a little bit. And then let's start with something easy. Just tell me about yourself. Now, I think if you just listen to what we just said, it comes down to research and knowing the company you're working with and people. And tell me something about yourself is a wide open question. I've seen people flub it, and I've also seen people crush it. But what Ian is talking about is strategically answering it as well. So Ian, why don't you kind of dive into like the ways that you've seen this work insanely well?
So Frank is right. This is the number one most viewed question on LinkedIn's learning page. From looking at the anxiety around it, it really freaks people out. And I think it freaks them out because it's so open-ended, because I think a typical interviewee likes very specific interview questions because they aren't, I think a lot of people would be worried about, I have a lot of ways I can go here, and I'm probably being evaluated on which route I go. So I think it makes them nervous. It's kind of like, Frank, a menu at a restaurant that has too many pages and it stresses you out because it's the paradox of choice. I think paradox of choice is playing here of, where do I go here? Do I go personal? Do I go business? Do I start to talk about my resume right away? If for both Frank and I, when we interview and we ask you something like this, we're just trying to gauge what you're going to say, but also get a little feel for who you are as a person. And sometimes if someone kind of freezes up on this, I'll get even more specific. Like, where did you grow up? Okay, what's it like growing up in Kansas City? What kind of things were you into growing up? Who are your influences? I'll get a little more specific if you just don't know where to go with this. But let's stick to a bias that I already just talked about. So this is where the just like me bias, you can play it in your area. So Frank, if you went and Googled Ian Matthews, if you just Googled me right now and you clicked on the first 4 or 5 links that you could find, what are some things you're probably going to find if you want to learn about me? If you had to go interview me, you know my internet profile. If you interviewed with me and you went and looked me up, what are some things you could learn about me really quick?
So I know we try not to be distracted, but I'm actually going to do it because I don't think I haven't looked you up in a while. So I would imagine the things that are going to come up first are probably Forbes, Twitter, Quora, places where you write. And so I just looked. Twitter was first, Forbes was second, LinkedIn 5on4 group is third, and then just different articles you
clearly this podcast doesn't turn up because no one's actually watching it, so the
Correct.
SEO is not good.
Second
I'd have
page.
to go to like the 3rd page of results to find it.
So those are the things that pop up for you first. So clearly what you understand pretty quickly is this person has a footprint, and you can look at it. So if you clicked on Forbes, for example, it talks about careers and contributions. LinkedIn brings you right to his 5on4 group. So Ian's big on this, and he's big on prep, knowing who you're interviewing with, and being prepared to kind of talk about those things and create likability. What I typically will do, when I was prepping for an interview, the internet wasn't as pervasive. There was usually a social event. Like the night before, there was somebody within the company. So I would create some type of story or likability to that and talk about it. One of the things that I think is really important, Ian, is explain the interview process. Typically, interviewers are not doing so on an island. Like what Ian and I aren't talking about the job fair. We're not talking about the phone screen. We're talking about the physical in-person interview. Now, that's different today because we use Zoom a lot, or some online camera app type of a thing because of COVID and ease. But typically, if we're hiring anybody of significance, like not an entry-level position, like there's going to be an in-person. And not only is there an in-person, but you're usually going to interview with a panel of people. So if you were interviewing at my company, you might interview with me and 3 others. Let's explain why that happens. You do that because you get 3 or 4 different people looking at somebody. You need 3 or 4 different inputs because this is who's going to manage them. And this is relevant because you're going to be telling many stories You could do the repeat, or you could do it in a way that is unique. So if you were to walk in with me and you interview with me last, and you just stumble through this question, I'm going to think you're probably not a very good interview. But if you were to say, hey, I've already talked to Angelo and Eddie about these things, are you cool if I talk about this? And if you're strategic in your thinking and you know who you're actually interviewing with, you pick things that make sense. If you had done the right research, you're going to know that Eddie's from Tennessee, Angelo's from Buffalo, I grew up in Florida, and you know a little bit about each of us, and you pick something that allows the interviewer to kind of grasp onto it. The other thing is, let's just say you're out of unique story, you're out of like facts about the people. Do this. I told Angelo and Eddie a real personal story. Is it cool if I share with you something from business? Sure. You're telling me, you're setting your frame. I've already done interview questions with a couple of people. I know you all are going to talk. And not only that, I'm going to pick a different avenue for you here. The people who are just like their eyes are like they're in the headlights, not great interviews, but people who understand what they're doing can take control right there by telling me they're prepared and they have their bearings.
But let's get back to so stay focused on the research here though. So this is a rapport building question, and your goal is to try to connect with the interviewer. So you know my footprint, you just did it, you just researched it, you know what I write about, you know what I podcast about because you're with me every time. What are some interests that would pop out that are public, that are very public, things that I'm very interested in?
So the things that pop out quickly are a lot about business, like a ton, hiring, culture, people. And then if I got into it and clicked on a few of these links, it's going to take me to 5-on-4 group, which I know the focus of the 5-on-4 group is to create unfair advantages for people in the work environment, basically give you a leg up. So there's tons to talk about there. If I was going to go a little bit further, it takes me to your Facebook page, which most likely has a picture with you and some people in your family in it. There's no doubt within the first 7 pictures I clicked on, somebody's going to be wearing something from Detroit. So very quickly, I've got 12 things that I know about Ian.
Yep, absolutely. So you can, I am not the biggest sharer online, but I would probably say I'm in the bottom 20th percentile of people that shares a lot personally. But if you just click around a little, you're going to see I'm a sports fan. You're going to see I coach sports. You're going to see that I'm into baseball with my son, that I love going to my daughter's stuff. You're going to see that I'm married. You're going to see I'm from Detroit, and you're going to see all that from what I write, what I post, what I talk about. It's not hard to find those things. So what my advice is, do a little homework on someone. And I would say this for any sales call you ever make too. Do some homework and know the person as well as you possibly can. And when you, like, there's a million things I could tell you about myself that I'm interested in about. There are literally millions. I like to read books. I like to travel. I like to do all this stuff. But if I'm meeting with someone, I'm going to try to find some things that we have in common. So when you ask me to tell me a little bit about myself, I'm going to share things that I know are also your interests. So if I see that you happen to be a dad and I'm interviewing with you and you coach baseball, why would I not lead with that? Well, a little bit about myself. I spend most of my time on baseball fields coaching these days, right? And you're immediately going to get the interviewer to cut you off and say, really, what's the age? What group are your kids? Or if they're not into sports, okay, I'm a big reader. Well, those are 2 very different things. I coach youth sports and I love to read. Neither of them are lying. There are different aspects of who I am as a person. But if I'm reading someone's online persona and they happen to be talking about books all the time and favorite book clubs they're in, I'm going to lead about, I love to read. I'm a voracious reader. I read all the time. I'm going to lead with that because that gives me the best chance of connecting with that interviewer very early in the process. So the reason why I think, Frankie, homework is so critical on tell me a little bit about yourself. That's your opportunity to show, not to show that you studied that person, but it's your opportunity to connect really quickly and show you and I are very similar people because we share common interests.
I understand everything you're saying, but I think fundamentally I have a different way to do it. And like, I don't understand those things. Like how to research. I'm not an incredible researcher. I'm just not. It's not my strength. But what my strength is what I retreat to is I try to tell interesting stories. Now, if you have the ability to connect, do it. But if you're more like me and unlike Ian, and this is harder for you to figure out how to connect the dots before you get there, have a cool, compelling story. Like, just tell me something neat. So I was single into my 40s. So on like there was a section in the dating section, and it would say, you tell me about yourself. But then at the bottom, it was favorite books or favorite hobbies or like favorite TV shows. And like, if you were telling me on the second line, like your favorite TV shows, like, I don't want to go out with you ever, because like there's a section for TV shows. Like, tell me a cool story about yourself. Get me interested. So if you can figure out the angle and impress your interviewer with your prep, awesome. If that's not your style, tell a compelling story. Just riffing. I was raised by an electrician who was raised by an electrician who was also a police officer and cop. And my family, hard work is like some of the really cool things that we bonded over. I loved as a kid going out and working with my granddad and my dad on construction sites. Some of my fondest memories were in construction and doing this. And like, I always knew construction was a life for me since I was a little kid. That was a story I told as a 22-year-old coming out of college because I was interviewing with construction companies. And my guess is if you were at a construction company, you probably have a pretty similar story. So I didn't know who it was. We didn't have the internet, but I told relevant stories. I didn't go right into clubbing in Ibiza. I told things that were relevant to an interview.
So love that. So I think a lot of people try to steer away from the personal here. I never do that. I always say I'm the son of a steel worker and a teacher. I just say that all the time because it gets people to think a little bit. It makes me a little more human than a suit with a resume. And I did this all the time, Frank, when I was at GE, and I would talk to customers and I'd go meet, like a plant manager of an auto plant or something. And they'd say, tell me a little bit about yourself, son. Like, how'd you get into this line of work? And I'd say, well, my dad was a steel worker. His dad was a steel worker. I've been around industrial folks my whole life growing up in Detroit. Every uncle worked in an auto plant. And immediately I went from like this punk college grad in, his pleated Banana Republic pants to one of us. Like, oh, you're blue collar, right? You kind of grew up. And I would share that on purpose, those little tidbits, because it told a story without saying many words. It told a story. A son of a steelworker means something to people like that.
So what I want to impart here is this. If you're listening to this, you're interviewing. We aren't. We've got jobs. We're trying not to work. We're the opposite. So what you need to do is you need to find that talk track that makes you uniquely you, that allows you to distinguish yourself in this moment. A business interview is mostly about business. If I ask you a personal question, like tell me about yourself, if you do it properly, you go personal and you build compelling things that I can pull on in my entire hour with you. Botched, you have to recover from this, but properly done, the way Ian has talked about it, the way I have talked about it, about coming from construction, coming from Detroit, it comes back and kind of, it's almost like your thesis statement for the entire interview that can be drawn back to. So the trick here is there isn't a trick. Be genuine, be yourself, say something compelling, connect the best you can, but give the interviewer something that allows you to be likable, connectable, and wants me to ask more questions. If you do that, you've successfully started off the interview the right way.
I also think you should be personal here because you have to be. How do you tell someone about yourself without being personal? But you have to connect the personal to what's in it for the interviewer, the hiring manager. So, yes. Son of an electrician, I'm not afraid of hard work and getting my hands dirty. Son of a teacher, which Frank also is. It's been instilled in me from a young age to always put education first. I'm still a big reader. I'm always learning. I'm always trying to educate myself and get better. My mom taught me that. I like sports. That means I'm competitive. I'm a big team player. I grew up playing multiple sports my whole life, all the way through high school, really instilled a deep sense of teamwork, competitiveness in me that still lingers with me. So those are all personal things that I just shared, but they also tell the interviewing manager, this is why I'd be a great person to hire. If you like competitive, if you like someone who's not afraid of the work, the grind, who's not silver spoon, if you like a lifelong learner, a quick learner, an educated person, I'm a good person to hire because of those little personal tidbits I just shared with you.
Here's something else. As a human being functioning in society on Earth, spinning around the sun, you're going to have opportunities to open your mouth in front of people your entire life. Sometimes it's an interview, sometimes it isn't. Having a personal elevator pitch is incredibly important. Ian has talked about it in front of steel workers, talking about his dad and his mom. Being able to quickly articulate what you do in 30 to 90 seconds is something you should always have. Now, it should be evolving. The 22-year-old version of this and the 46-year-old version of this for me were different. But the point is, if you have that kind of in your head and you are ready to talk about it always, this question is a lot easier because you kind of have, you know who you are, you know that elevator pitch. And if you've done it properly, the pitch is easy because then you then move it to, hey, Ian, you might find this interesting coming from Detroit. As a baseball coach, I love this. That's how you take the elevator pitch and take it from good to incredible with a little bit of prep.
I'm going to just, last thing, and we'll go to the question number 2 though. So everything we just said, and I'll show you how you link it to your homework. When I interviewed with NVR, I asked around a little bit of who I'd be interviewing with. I was interviewing with the CEO, Paul Seville from Pittsburgh, very, very detailed accounting background. I was interviewing with Joe Madigan from Pittsburgh, more of a personal kind of backslapping guy. Dad worked in the steel industry. And I was interviewing with Bill Inman, who was kind of a mix of both of them, but really came up in sales, and his dad worked in an auto plant. I learned all that before I interviewed with any of them. So when I did my tell me a little bit about you with Bill Inman, I was talking about all my time in Detroit being around auto workers my whole life because his dad worked at Ford for 40 years. So I talked about that. When I met with Joe Madigan, I talked about steel mills. I brought that piece up. When I met with Paul Seville, I focused on my engineering and process background because that's how he thinks. He's very methodical. He's very process focused. So I shared bits of who I was based on the homework I did on those 3. It was all the same, Frankie, but it was nuanced based on who I was meeting with because I found out a little bit about them.
That's how you do great. You take that elevator pitch and you adjust it just slightly for your audience. The story is similar, but the connectivity to the interviewer is quite different because of what you did in those little finite details of making it so the person hearing you really heard you.
That's right. So the number two question that people want to know about is, what is your greatest strength? And there's a companion question that goes along with this. I'm curious, Frank, I know this is a very popular question. Do you ask this question?
No,
I do not either. So I guess
I don't ask this one, or what is your greatest weakness?
Yeah. So we don't ask this question, but it is one of the most common questions. You should probably expect that someone is going to ask this question when you go here. I'm going to start here. So when someone asks me this, I like to be a little self-deprecating on this question. So I like to tell a little bit of a joke. Obviously, I feel like I have a lot of strengths. I don't lack in the ego department. But if someone asks me this, I'll say something like, I'm glad you didn't start with weakness because that would take us all day. I've said that multiple times in interviews and it always gets a laugh. And it also says, when you're ready to ask me about weaknesses, I'm not going to be afraid to talk about them because I'm human and I have them. Another way to kind of joke about this is if someone says, what's your greatest strength? You could say, well, clearly it isn't interviewing or something like that, telling a little joke about how if it started off slow in your interview. But I would say pick something that I think this is where job matching matters. So if I'm interviewing for a sales job, I'm probably not going to talk about my process mindset so much. If I'm interviewing for an engineering job, maybe I'm not going to focus on my ability to acclimate with the new crowd all the time as much, and my ability to sell and persuade. Those are both strengths of mine, but I think what really matters is you've studied the job description before you get this interview question. So you should really know if it's a project manager position, let's say it's a construction project manager position, well, being focused, task-oriented, getting things done, meeting deadlines, those things are incredibly important. And Frank talks about this a lot, and he already did today. You're going to interview with 3 people, and you probably are going to interview with the most junior person first. That's your time to learn about, as much as humanly possible, what do the best people in this position do well? Then when you do your second, third, and fourth interview, you better be listing strengths based on what the best people in the company already do well.
That's right. In a corporate environment, like we would line up four interviews, we'd have a lunch, and there was no way in hell that was ending early. In my business, if someone bombs interview 1 and 2, you never make it to me. So that's real. We're a small business. Hey, it's just not a fit. That's real. So to Ian's point, you should be improving with every interview, because the interview is part of the due diligence process. You're in the crucible for the first time. So I'm going to kind of blend strengths and weaknesses together and talk about this for a second. Ian and I, both parents or children of school teachers, we've talked about this ad nauseum. I was raised to never show off, never run my mouth, never do those things. And I struggled in an interview to talk about strengths for all of my 20s. I finally had an executive come up to me and say, when someone asks you for your strengths, do not be a shrinking violet. Answer the damn question. You have strengths, you're confident, answer it. Someone else told me, when you're inside that room, when the door closes, you're Barry Bonds. And Barry Bonds in my 20s and 30s when I was interviewing was hitting 70 dingers a year. Like he was a mouthy, big guy. So this is your opportunity to sell you. Do it how it's comfortable and authentic to you, but be prepared and talk about it. If someone said, tell me about your greatest strengths, I'm going to have a hard time with that, but I'm going to say, can I tell you about a couple of accomplishments I'm really proud of? For me, I would do that because I like telling stories that have good endings. It's compelling. And that's how I answered a lot of those questions. And what it would do is it would give the interviewer 5 or 6 other things to ask me about. One of the things that I was taught early is a good interview is about 4 questions, because you say enough where the interviewer doesn't have to look at his interview sheet to ask you more stuff. You're going to get these 7 questions thrown at you if your prep is wrong or if you're not compelling. But if you steer the narrative, you take advantage of each opportunity and you tell your story, that person is interested. Like, I've got email and phone, and text and things to go do. I have to interview you. I want to hire you. So it's your job to take all that inertia and bundle it up in a way that gives me enough Easter eggs that I can continue to ask you questions. Whenever you talk about a strength, be self-deprecating. Whenever you talk about a weakness, talk about the success that came behind the weakness. Tell a compelling story. If you do those things in an interview, it really works insanely well.
And I love that. And interviewers will ask you this question because it's on their list, right?
Yes.
They might be inexperienced. Or this might be their favorite question. They like to ask it because someone asked them this question many times when they were interviewing. So you're going to get asked this, but with an experienced interviewer, they don't need to ask you this question if you handled the tell me a little bit about yourself right, because tell me a little bit about yourself should have covered what your strengths are. And through the interview, by telling stories about your career and things you've done, you are telling me your strength. That's why I don't ask what's your greatest strength, because I'm asking more about specific things like situations you've been in and how you handled it. And by listening enough in there, I'm kind of figuring out what you lean on, what's your go-to pitch.
My first question is, tell me about yourself. If you do that right, I don't ask my second question, but my second question is, tell me something you're proud of. So I've gotten out of you whatever you think of yourself and you're willing to share, and something you're proud of. You tell me something you're proud of, I'm going to draw strengths out of it. And then I'm going to say, well, what roadblocks did you come across inside of accomplishing this? And ask those questions and work through it, because I don't follow the script. I want to dig that. If I'm following a script, you're doing a terrible job of sitting in front of me, because I'm not getting what I need out of you to ask compelling questions back.
I'm going to use another personal example just to wrap this one up. So interviewing with the CEO, the operation that I was going to come in as a vice president had terrible customer service. It was an entitled sales organization that had long since given up on putting the customer first. And I wasn't asked what's your greatest strength, but I was asked why I felt like I was uniquely situated for the position, or what makes me unique as a manager of salespeople.
Yeah.
And what I used in that situation, I said, well, my first sales job, I started with 0 customers, and everyone else had a big base of customers that they called on. They were kind of farmers, and I was hired as a hunter. And so I made 100 cold calls a day, and people hung up on me, and it sucked. And when finally someone spent money with me and trusted me and gave me an order, I remembered what it felt like to have no customers, and it never left me. I remembered how hard it was to go get my first customers and to keep earning their trust. And so as a leader, I've always been absolutely fanatical about listening to customers and doing everything I could to give them what they want. And when someone reports to me who doesn't have that in their gut, I have to find someone else. And it really resonated with the CEO when I told that story, because he was sick of and tired of hearing about his entitled sales force. And to have someone that had that in their gut, which is true about me, but I could have used 100 different strengths when he asked me that. I chose that for a very calculated and specific reason to share it, because I knew that's what they needed in the organization to fix the problems they were trying to solve.
So the next one we're going to get into is tell me about a failure you've learned from.
Actually, no, it's not. It is, what is your greatest weakness?
Oh, I thought I covered weakness with strength. So
that's the companion. That's the companion. They're similar though. Weakness and failure are very similar. I think we cover weakness quick because we can do that now that we've been on the other side.
So if you're going to talk about a weakness, I would lead into the next question, and that's tell me about a failure you've learned from. I would never bring up a weakness that I didn't have already solved. What Ian just talked about a second ago is how he used that feeling with a CEO. The CEO, if you've never looked him up, has a house in Palm Beach, has a private plane. He's probably a billionaire, even though he's very private and quiet. But he remembers starting. Everybody remembers starting. Anybody who's ever gotten to that level can still resonate with starting. And what I have always found is a success recipe is it's not starting a new position or succeeding in a new position. It's, can you identify the path you took? Can you show me how I learned a skill? Can you show me the first time I learned the skill, it was hard, but the second time I learned a different skill, I used those first lessons and adapted it into a second lesson. And how did I do that into a third lesson? In my career specifically, I went from being a home builder. I didn't know how to summarize it when I was interviewing, but when I was actually physically building houses, I could tell you the process. When I moved into sales, it was a slightly different process, but the recipe was pretty similar. There's frustration, there's things you got to overcome until you can master it. Managing people was third for me. So when I stacked all these things up against themselves, they all had the same pattern. And then when you get into an interview, you talk about, well, I stunk at this. This is the process. This is how I did it. This is how we went through it. This is how it was when I became a master. And this is how I can do it from sustainability. Ian took all the way to the bottom in that process, and he got granular with it. And that's how he won the CEO over, because at its core, that's what that business needed. Ian had multiple successes, but he told a good story to someone who's an engineer, who's really smart, who's detail oriented. And he knew that that was the friction point in the business, and he focused there.
I needed to prove to them that I was the solution to a problem they had, and that I was smart enough to understand what their problem was, and that I could fix that problem. So telling them about strengths that wouldn't fix that problem, that would be nice to have, I showed them the strengths I had that were need to have. So what is your greatest weakness is typically, this is number 3, is typically a companion question to what is your greatest strength. So an interviewer will typically say, what is your greatest strength? Listen for that. And then next on their list of questions is, converse me, would you like to share with me your greatest weakness? So I'm going to start by saying a couple things you shouldn't do here. I think bad advice is to list something that's actually a strength. So someone might say something like, well, I've been told that I care just too damn much about my teammates, or something just nauseating like that, where they're listing an actual strength and they're trying to be cheeky, and they're trying to mask it as a weakness. So, I'm too organized, or I'm just a perfectionist and I have to do things right, or I work too hard, I work too late into the night. A decent interviewer is going to see right through this. It's tired. I would not do that. Really, there's a couple of reasons why anyone would ask about a weakness. One, they want to see if you have enough intelligence to not list something that's going to blow you up. So obviously, a place here is not to say, I'm a sucker for some good marijuana. You're not going to say something dumb here, right? So this is kind of an intelligence clue, right? So you're not going to come out and do that. But also, I think they want to see, are you confident enough to actually list something? And so I think here, if you get asked this question, list a weakness that isn't going to hurt you in the position. So let's say it's a position where you're going to work in a team, and you already know that, right? So this is going to be a highly team-oriented position. Well, if someone says list a weakness here, you could say, well, I'm an extroverted person. I've learned about myself that I work best within teams. I struggle in work situations where I'm isolated for a long period of time, where I don't get interaction with the team. So now you've listed a weakness. This is a weakness. I don't do well when I'm isolated for long periods of time, for a position that never gets isolated for long periods of time. So you've listed a weakness that isn't going to hurt you and isn't going to make the hiring manager think, wow, that is a red flag. We can't hire that person, right? You're not listing it. Like, I wouldn't list that weakness if this were an engineering role for computer programming where there is no interaction with the team and you're just banging out code all day with headphones on. If I'm the manager, I'd be thinking, well, I actually kind of isolate my engineers for long periods of time. He's going to hate this job. I would only list that weakness for a job that I know that wouldn't hold you back in.
Situational awareness is critical. It's critical in everything in life, but it's really critical in an interview. Picking the right stories. Again, the company brought you in because they want to hire you. That's the goal. Like, we don't want to endlessly interview. So if you give us enough good nuggets to pull it forward, that's the point. And I think what Ian's talking about is the strategy that goes around that, but still being honest with a weakness.
So a similar but different question is, tell me about a failure that you learned from. Frank, I always ask this question. This is a staple. If I only can ask you 3 questions, this is on there. Do you ask this question ever?
I will ask something very similar to this almost always. If it doesn't get volunteered, I ask something similar.
Okay. So the reason why I always ask this question I'm judging your reaction to it. Does it freak you out that I asked you about failure? The answer to this question tells me so much about a person's confidence. It tells me about their mindset. Do they have a growth mindset? Do they have a fixed mindset? Someone with a growth mindset just sees failures as part of the process. They're, like a scientist, right? It's just part of the process of their maturity, their growth. They're almost grateful for failures. They're almost glad that they've happened so that they could take their next step in the evolution in their career. So for me, I will always ask this because I like to work with people that are not, 1, afraid to fail, but 2, look at failures as ways to just get better, to grow, because that's life.
Yes. So what I typically ask if it's not about a failure is I ask about something you like. I try and get it and pull it out of what I've already gotten from you so far with tell me about yourself and give me some strengths. And then what I might ask for is hurdles that you've overcome. It's always something along those lines. But this comes back to what I said earlier, telling the story about learning. Like learning is not a straight line. It's a jagged up and down process. So in the process of learning or becoming a pro at something, if you can identify the failures, you're going to connect with the interviewer because they have felt that. In addition, if you can talk about how you, like, I'm going to ask you a different question, Ian. Do you care about do you specifically care about the answer to your question if the person tells you a compelling story?
I'm going to say it depends. A compelling story is good. I would say the one area where I am paying attention to was failure an issue of judgment. So that to me, there's a difference here. And I would say when you get this question, when you put together your list of failures, because I will typically ask for a second. I dive into failure. I love to see how people talk about it. So have a couple ready. There's a difference between an effort failure and an ambitious failure and a judgment failure. There's very different. And if you are showing me failures that are consistently just bad decision making on your part, you're probably gonna be a bad decision maker here. But if you're showing me failures where you went for it, like I finished fourth in qualifying for the 100-meter breaststroke for the 2008 Olympics. That's a pretty good failure to share with me. That is, to me, is not failure. To you, it is. You were just ambitious and came up a little short. Versus I qualified for the Olympics and then didn't get brought on the trip because I got caught for doping. Like that's totally different failures, right, Frank?
Correct.
Like one would make me pause, and one I would say, damn, that's a good failure. I'm impressed.
The reason I asked that question of you is this: tell me about a failure you've learned from. I am way less fixated on that question than I am what you say about it and what you tell me about it. If we use the example of you finished behind Michael Phelps and two other people to get in the pool in the Olympics, like that's a pretty incredible story. And I can ask some questions about it and dive into it. To me, it comes down to the process, what's happening. I like how you've determined, is it an effort fail or a judgment problem? And you're trying to pull at that. But those are the things that you can do in the fail side that impress people in the interview process. Is we've all failed. We're lying to you if we say we haven't failed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So understanding it and knowing the process and how you get over it, I think is huge. And again, if you can say, now I've identified when I'm getting into failure and prevent it from happening, and I go past it, to me, that's a really big part of the learning process that happens inside of businesses.
I love it. And I start with some humor because the interviewer is looking for your confidence here. They're looking to see how you see it. Are you confident enough to talk about failures? So start with a little humor. Like you might want to clear your schedule for the rest of the day because we're going to be here a while if you want to talk about my failures, or how much time do we have? Get them to laugh a little because you're showing like, yeah, there's a lot of them. And I'm not afraid to tell you I've failed a lot. That's why I'm sitting here getting interviewed, because I've learned from them all.
I did everything I could to keep my resume to 2 pages, mostly with successes. However, if it was failures, it could have been a small book.
Like a small book. Yes. Have a little fun with it. Joke around a little bit. I think a big thing here is you want to pick examples where you have a subsequent example where you showed that you learned, evolved, and took a different approach, right? So I hired a manager and it was a poor decision. And really what happened was I promoted the best person in my office instead of promoting the best leader. And here's how it went bad. Here's what I learned from it. The next time I had to make a promotion, here's how I did it completely different. And here's the result. And here's what I learned from it. So you always have like, I failed. Here's what I learned. Here's the next time I was faced with the same decision. And here's how I went a different direction because of a direct result of that failure.
And the learning process is so big. When you can show that you're getting smarter every single time you go through a failure, that is what an interviewer looks like. Your goal at a company is to get promoted a bunch, which is going to give you opportunities to fail a bunch. And if you are the type of person who is short-circuited the learning process and can speed through it, you are the kind of person I want to pay a ton to, because I know I can give you a lot of things to handle.
And I would say, just wrapping this one up, pick some failures where you shot for the moon and came up short, right? So pick some goals that are going to impress the person in front of you of, damn, that you went for it. When you talk about failure on a goal that's kind of weak in the first place, where you set the bar low and then came up short, you're showing me that you don't really have a lot of ambition. But even with that ambition, you still aren't getting it done. So number 5, and for whatever reason, this question irritates people. I think it comes across as arrogant, which is, why do you want to work here? I just from looking online with a lot of people are like, what makes you think it's kind of like easy, this is meant to be a softball as well. This question, I won't always ask it exactly like this, Frank, but I'll ask, what have you learned about our company? What has you interested in us? So I won't ask, why do you want to work here? I will ask, what has you interested in us or this position? Just because I'm curious. But really what I'm looking at is, how prepared are you? How much homework did you do? Do you have a reason for wanting this job, or is it a paycheck? Is there something about our company and the way we do things that you really want to work here? You could see yourself making an impact? Because I think that motivation matters. I think inspiration matters. I think feeling like they have a purpose when they come work for you, they'll be better workers. So that's the reason why I'm typically going to ask some variation of, why do you want to work here?
As the employer, you need to know who you are and what your company is. Like, I wouldn't have asked this question for the first maybe 8 years we were in business, because it comes, I would ask, what's compelling about this position? Why are you interviewing? The company was very hard to discern what the hell was going on with the company. But I do ask that now. And I ask that question, and I want to drive at, what is it? Is it you can't find something else? Is there something specific we've done? Have you heard about us? Like, an interview is an opportunity for an interviewer to understand what the market thinks of it, to get an unbiased opinion, and it's data points. So if you've done research and so speaks highly of you, or I saw this, or I know someone, or I watched something and I thought it was interesting, I've always wanted to get into this line of work, I flipped a couple of houses and you guys do hundreds of them, I found that really appealing because I understand how hard this is. Like, something that's interesting that draws us in. Because what it comes down to is, anybody can check the box. We want people who are passionate about checking the box, doing the job. I don't want to hire you and hope that that's the job that you have forever. My hope and goal is that you are someone who can move up in the organization and make us better. So if you give a compelling answer here about, I saw this as an entry-level position to hopefully something else if I've earned it, like, those are things that you can really turn this into, not the company, but you, and you just frame it inside what the company's put out there.
I'm going to come back to it again. If you've done your homework, this is where it should come out. This is where it should come out. If I were interviewing with Frank, I could see he posts videos online. There's a lot on his website. There's a lot in his social media about his company, the things they do in philanthropy. There's a lot of things I could bring up here where I would say, this is why I'm excited about working here. But honestly, Frank, you're the reason why I want to work here. I've watched a lot of your material. This is what I'm excited about. So I think this is where it should come out that, let's say you'd say, this company likes to promote from within. I see you've been with this company for 12 years as a manager. I like this company, obviously must treat people well. You've been promoted several times since you've been here. That motivates me. You weren't just hired from the outside. You obviously must like it. And then you can turn that around. What what about the culture keeps you here for so long in this position? Because that's unusual, but you're proving I've done my homework and I have a very good reason for being here and wanting to work in your company.
It's evident as good interviewers, we know where you got information. Like I might know you got it from Carla and then Eddie and then Angelo. And then ultimately you sit down with me and you state things that they told you. I'm okay with that. That means you're adaptive. That means you're thinking. That means you're striving to actually win an interview and you're using new, fresh data and using that in front of me. Like that's positive stuff. And that's how you can build a very compelling case. Hey, Carla had done these 2 jobs. Eddie has done these 3 jobs. Angelo has done this. I think that's incredible. I came in here excited. I'm even more excited after meeting them about what could be the future. That's a great answer.
I think that's perfect. And Frank, we said we were going to keep this to 1 hour. So I know that we build this as 7 interview questions, but I think we are going to save 2 as bonus for the next time we do this. I think we wrap this up with 5 questions. We have 2 really juicy ones, but you're going to have to turn in at a different time to get those 2 from us because we wanted to keep this to under an hour.
It's a cliffhanger.
It's a cliffhanger. You want to tune in next time for the next 2. It's like those old Batman episodes.
So I'll close and I'll turn it over to you and you can put a bow on this thing. Be prepared. Know yourself. Know the company you're working with, who you're talking to. Don't just send the same form letter to everybody. Actually be prepared. Be honest in your assessment. I'm strong here. I'm weak here. These are things that I'm good at. If there's huge dark secrets in your life, stay away from those and strive towards things that show good decision making, always striving for a little bit more, being likable, being a team player, and showing some successes. If you can do that in an interview, you can win an interview. That's it. Like I saw something on LinkedIn this morning about this woman who interviewed with like 85 companies and she finally got a job. And 85 is a ton. Like I immediately just thought of there has to be fundamentally something not happening in those interviews if you interviewed 85 times.
I hope she watches this episode.
We may have to say
you should do a little bit better than that. So the last thing I'll just say is we live in a world where everything is public, where everything is on social media, and the entire goal of social media is to only show the tiny little snippets of your life that are perfect and put on a better show than what is actually going on. If your interviewing manager that is interviewing you has any experience at all, they can see beyond that kind of crap. I am always refreshed by a vulnerable person who is confident enough to show me the great stuff and some of the not so great stuff. And I'm always impressed by someone who did their homework, prepared a little bit, and wants to show me the best aspects of how they can help it. So, the last thing I would just leave everyone with, be vulnerable. Be vulnerable. That goes against everything you think you should do in an interview where you want to come across as Superman and bulletproof. But God, it is refreshing, Frank, when someone is sitting in front of me who is confident enough to say, I'm not perfect. I'm very far from perfect, but I'm getting better all the time. And I just love a vulnerable, confident person with a growth mindset like that. I'll hire them every time because I'm going to like working with that person.
I agree. Being honest, being you, and properly curating you for the interview environment you're in and the person you're in front of is a magic formula.
So hope this helps everyone, and we'll get working on the outline for the next one. We do 5 more interview questions you're going to get asked. See you, Frankie.
See you, Ian.